Good evening, everyone. We're going to reconvene the conditional use hearing for Mountain Trail Solar this evening, and I'm going to ask the applicant's counsel if he wants to introduce his next witness.
I do. Michael.
Hello.
Call Michael Sphene.
I do.
Can you hear me all right, Michael?
Yep.
Am I good to go? Can you please state your name for the record?
Michael Sween,
And with whom are you employed, Mr. Sphene?
Western Ecosystems Technology, Inc.
Okay, and I'll just refer to that as West. What does West specialize in?
So West specializes in scientific, defensible, and professional approach to solving natural resource problems facing government and industry. Specifically, we do a lot of work in the renewable energy industry, including wind and solar.
Okay, and where is your business address? What is your business address?
So I work out of the office in Calgary, Alberta, Canada.
Okay, and what is your position?
I'm a senior wildlife biologist and project manager.
Does West also have offices in Pennsylvania?
Yes, West has an office in Camp Hill, Pennsylvania.
Okay. And the numbers have changed a little bit, but what's been identified as Exhibit 48 is this, which I'm holding up in my hand, if you can see it, is this a copy of your CV?
Yes.
Okay. And does it accurately outline your education and work experience?
Yes.
Did you prepare this exhibit?
Yes.
How long have you been practicing in this field, Mr. Sphene?
I've been practicing for 14 years in wildlife ecology.
Okay, with a specialization in renewable energy?
Yes.
How many solar projects have you worked on?
At least 40 solar projects at this point.
Okay, and what type of work have you done with respect to solar development?
With respect to solar development, I've done a lot of work on the pre-construction side, everything from constraints analysis to environmental assessment, through permitting into different phases of the project, into construction, operation, and post-construction mortality monitoring once the projects go into operation.
Okay, and this is all with respect to wildlife, correct?
Correct.
And have you ever conducted any bird surveys?
Yes, I've extensively conducted bird surveys, breeding bird surveys, bird migration surveys, targeted surveys for endangered and threatened species, multiple years of bird surveys throughout my career.
What is a post-construction mortality monitoring report?
So post-construction mortality monitoring is surveys that are done once a project goes into operation. So typically there are standard transects that are walked by a biologist at a solar facility. And that biologist looks for carcasses on the ground to see if there's been any mortalities. And then that information over a monitoring year would be combined with the rate that carcasses are removed by predators, as well as how efficient that particular searcher is. And through that analysis, an estimated number of bird mortalities is calculated through a statistical program, the results of which are written up in a post-construction monitoring report.
And have you ever testified as an expert analyzing the potential wildlife impacts with respect to these types of projects?
Yes.
And what types of proceedings have you testified?
Varies to this one regulatory proceeding where they're reviewing multiple aspects of wildlife and other components of the project for regulatory approval.
Okay. At this time, I'd like to offer Mr. Sveen as an expert in wildlife ecology related to solar projects.
Mr. Cluck, do you have any questions with regard to his qualifications?
Yes.
Mr. Sveen, can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Everybody in the audience, you can hear me without a mic? I talk loud enough. You were asked if you previously testified as an expert witness, is that correct?
Yes.
Have you ever testified as an expert witness in the United States of America?
My expert witness testimony has been written as well as on the stand, like this one, for multiple solar projects as well as a wind project, predominantly in Alberta, Canada.
Answer the question, please.
Did I not answer your question? Could you repeat the question?
Yes. Have you ever testified as an expert witness in the United States of America?
No.
Thank you. No objection to the witness testifying. My questions will go to witness. No objection to the meeting activities.
Thank you. Mrs. Palinuk, do you have any questions with regard to this witness's qualifications?
I have a question as to why we're bringing in the witness. I don't understand this process.
So we're still in the applicant's rebuttal case. So my understanding is that this witness is being proffered to rebut testimony about the migratory bird patterns. So that's why this witness is being brought in. So at this point, he's being offered as an expert. As a party, you have the opportunity to ask him questions at this point about his qualifications. You'll have a later opportunity to cross-examine him as well. Do you have any questions? Mr. Hartman, no questions. Mr. Hoffner, are you here this evening? Mrs. Stabile, Mr. and Mrs. Yob, Mr. Osenbach, Mr. Balthaser, Mrs. Balthaser, Ms. Fowler, Mr. Fowler. Any questions from members of the board as to his qualifications? Okay. Mr. Sveen will be accepted as an expert for the area so stated.
Thank you. Mr. Sveen, are you familiar with the Mountain Trail Solar Project?
Yes.
Okay. Are you familiar with what's been identified as Exhibit 011, which is a March 29, 2023 letter from Hawk Mountain Sanctuary?
Yes.
Okay. And that letter outlined several concerns, which included bird mortality, habitat depletion, barriers to wildlife movement, and impacts to the Kittatinny Ridge Important Bird Area.
Yes.
Okay. At a previous hearing, Dr. Lori Goodrich from Hawk Mountain testified. Did you review that testimony?
Yes.
And have you prepared a written analysis addressing the wildlife impacts for this project?
Yes.
And that is a March 19th memorandum, which has been identified as Exhibit 58. I'm holding in my hand.
Yes.
Can you please explain what the concerns that were raised with respect to bird mortality?
So there were three main concerns raised on bird mortality. One was on the topic of concentrating solar arrays. Another was on the lake effect hypothesis, and a third one was on aerial insectivore mortality.
So we've had several hearings, and I believe that the board's aware that this is not capable. Well, let me ask you: is this project capable of producing concentrated solar arrays?
No, this is a photovoltaic solar project. It's not a concentrating a solar array. So
This is beyond this witness's expertise.
The objection is sustained.
Okay. Are concentrated solar arrays an issue? Okay, I'm just going to withdraw the question. It's not a concern. You're not concerned with concentrated solar arrays.
No, I am not concerned about concentrating solar arrays at the project. They're not being proposed.
What types of effects do concentrated solar arrays have on wildlife?
So in a concentrated solar array, typically you have a mirror that's focusing the light on a particular place to heat water. It might be a line or a central tower. And in those cases, all of those mirrors facing the same direction can superheat the air and can cause birds to become incinerated or catch fire. So you need that mirror surface in order to do that, where it's concentrating the light into a particular area. You call that phenomenon solar flux.
Can you repeat what you call that?
Solar flux.
Solar flux. Okay. What is the lake effect hypothesis?
So the lake effect hypothesis was formulated in about 2014 when in the Sonoran and Mojave Desert region in Southern California, a post-construction mortality report described the mortalities of water obligate and associated species at this solar facility. So when I say water obligate, I'm referring to species that are can only take off from water. They can't take off on land. So an example would be a loon, where their legs are so far in the back of their body that they can't, they just physically can't take off on land. They need water.
So this isn't. Oh, sorry. Go ahead. I didn't know you.
And so, what the thought was, seeing that these mortalities were present at this location, is that birds were mistaking the solar facility for a lake and flying down, trying to land on it, and then either being killed at the collision, or they were injured and being predated on, unable to take back off again.
Okay. And since the formulation of this hypothesis, have there been any studies or publications on this subject?
Absolutely. There have been multiple publications and studies, and as more solar projects went into operation and more post-construction mortality monitoring was completed, it came to light that this phenomenon seemed to be limited to this one desert region in Southern California that didn't have large amounts of water nearby. Once reports came in from other areas of California, as well as Alberta, Florida, and Wisconsin.
So you mentioned Alberta. Dr. Goodrich based her testimony on a study that was done in Alberta. Are you aware of what that study would have been?
There is only one study that I am aware of that evaluated multiple post-construction mortality reports together, and that report was authored by West, the company that I work for.
Okay. And are you associated with that study at all?
I did not author the original study, but I've been working on it since then, synthesizing new reports as they become publicly available, and reviewing the data as it comes in.
Okay. And just to be clear, with the lake hypothesis, this theory, it doesn't apply even in 2014. It was just for water obligates, birds, species.
Yeah, this is referring to water obligates and water associate birds. It's not the theory itself isn't to apply to all birds widely. The concern was around birds specifically landing on water, and so that theory is really focused on those types of birds more than the passerines or raptors or something like that.
Okay. So based on all the studies you reviewed and conducted, have you come to any conclusions about the lake effect hypothesis?
The main conclusion that we've come to after reviewing all this data from across North America is that the lake effect hypothesis is limited to a specific region in Southern California, and we don't see it applying outside of that region.
Okay. And you've reviewed studies all across North America, just not Alberta, correct?
Sorry, can you repeat the
studies
question?
that you've reviewed, it's just not based on birds in Alberta, Canada.
Correct. I've reviewed reports from California, Alberta, Wisconsin, and Florida. Basically, any publicly available report that West has been able to find, we've incorporated into our analyses on these reports, and done our best to find any publicly available document that we can to help be more informed about mortality, bird mortality at solar facilities.
Okay. What about the concern with respect to insectivore birds?
So with respect to aerial insectivores, there were some papers published on a potential attraction of insects to solar facilities. However, we don't see that translated into mortalities. So when we look at all of this data compiled of bird mortalities across North America, aerial insectivores, birds like swallows and swifts, compose a very small percentage of mortality. I believe I have listed 1% in the analyses that I went through in my wildlife analysis. So it's a very small portion overall.
Okay. In your professional opinion, do you believe the proposed project proposes a significant risk to insectivore birds?
No.
Okay. Another concern that was raised by Hawk Mountain was that the project will deplete habitat for nesting and migratory birds. Do you believe that this is an issue with this project?
No, I don't believe that this is an issue. So there's been a couple of things done on the siting of this project that are important to note. One of which is that the project is primarily sited on cultivation for rotational crops, which if we're going to assign a value, say, to different habitat types for how much diversity and abundance of species you get, rotational crops are very low relative to other habitat types. As well, the project has been sited around existing treed areas and wetlands and kept that in place. And the project has also made commitments around native vegetation, as well as planting vegetation around the project that otherwise wouldn't be there as it would be used for rotational crops.
Do do raptors, do they nest in a field or in trees?
Raptors depends on the species, but in terms of a rotational crop area, that would be problematic for a raptor to be nesting within there. Nesting in the trees would be is where we find a lot of nesting raptors, though habitats do vary. And when we talk about raptors on this project, there's a lot of raptors moving through on migration, but are not necessarily stopping to breed.
Another concern that was raised by Hawk Mountain was that the project's fencing will act as a barrier to movement for amphibians, reptiles, deer, and other mammals. In your professional opinion, does the project present a significant barrier to wildlife movement?
No. So again, there's a couple points to discuss here. One of them is that the project's been divided into 3 separate areas, and in between, those areas, they've maintained vegetation, so that the treed areas and the wetlands to allow for wildlife movement between the fences. So it's not one continuous block. In addition, we have some raised fencing areas proposed for the project. So smaller species, reptiles, amphibians, small mammals will still be able to pass through the fencing. So it would be the larger mammals that would not be able to pass through the fence, but we have that sort of corridors through the wooded and wetland areas for them to pass through around the project.
What is an important bird area?
So an important bird area is typically defined by the National Audubon Society, and they have criteria on identifying what a particular, whether or not a particular place meets that criteria. And typically it requires either a large congregation of migrating birds that come to an area or that breed in a particular area, or it could be an endangered listed species which has a small specialized habitat that they live in. So there are there's sort of strict criteria on whether or not a place is considered an important bird area by the National Audubon Society.
Is this project located in an important bird area?
So it is not. There is an important bird area at the Kittatinny Ridge, but that is located north of the project area and doesn't include the lands that this project is proposed in.
In your professional opinion, does the project present a significant risk to migrating raptors?
No. So like I touched on earlier, raptor mortalities are not very common at solar projects. Approximately 2% of mortalities are raptors through the reports that I examined. Raptor mortalities are more of an issue on things like transmission lines, distribution lines where there's an electrocution risk. And from what I understand, this project has buried their collector lines and minimized the distance for the connection to the transmission line.
What is the distance some raptors can travel in a year?
In a year, certainly. So depending on the species, some remain local to an area, while others can be long-distance migrants. So as an example, the broadwing hawk breeds in the boreal forest up in Canada, but spends the winter down in South America. So it can be just astounding distances that these hawks migrate over.
So birds just don't stop at country borders?
No.
Okay. So what makes the you may have already said this, but what makes the Kittatinny bird area an important bird area?
So the Kittatinny Ridge was identified by the National Audubon Society as an important bird area, primarily as it is a major flyway for migrating raptors, and it also provides nesting habitat for many forest interior species. And when I say flyway, what the raptors are doing is using the topographic feature of a ridge to sort of ride the thermals and effectively save energy when they migrate. And so because of this topographic feature and where it is located, a number of raptors on migration use this specific feature.
Okay. In your professional opinion, does the project present a significant risk to wildlife?
No.
Okay, I have no further questions for this witness.
Thank you. Cross-examination, Mr. Cluck.
Just a second, sir. I'm looking at the transcript from December the 5th, and I believe the applicant was supposed to provide communications between this expert and his client with respect to a draft analysis responding to the Hawk Mountain March letter. We have not received anything other than the 2 exhibits that were marked today.
Do you have a page number on that?
I'm in the 680s.
Just give us a moment to pull up the transcript.
I'm not sure what relevance it is. I recall an argument that we were not going to provide anything if we didn't provide it on our case in chief.
I recall you making that argument. I don't recall that argument prevailing. Just give us a moment.
Russ, it ends at 689, and it's sort of left hanging.
Well, it's been 6 months, and this is the first that has been brought up, so I don't think there's an issue in the reading there was.
Okay, well, let me go ahead with the cross-examination.
I've just asked for a moment to look at the transcript, and I understand that you gentlemen are very anxious, but I can't. I just pulled up the transcript, so just give me a moment. Mr. Gallagher, is the report that's now been identified as A58 the report that you were referencing on December 5th that had not been completed? Okay. Is it the same report that you were referencing? Is this?
No, the report was done after the testimony of Dr. Privilege.
Okay. So the report that you have that you have marked as A58 is not the report that would have been referenced in December. Okay. So you still have not produced the report that was referenced in December.
And through that transcript, there's no, under the federal rules, there's no duty to provide any evidence of any drafts. And I have no idea if there's objections, and so that we not do this or not. So,
The federal rules are not applicable.
that's the rule of evidence.
So our ordinance does say that the board can require other documents and reports. And I believe, and I don't recall, Mr. Clark, if it was on this report or a different report that the applicant refused to provide, that I indicated that if you wanted to prepare a subpoena for the chairman's signature, that would be taken. So I'll invite you again that if you want this report to be produced, that you should submit a subpoena via email to me for that purpose.
It wasn't this one, but I hear.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
I want to do some housekeeping. Michael, just be patient. Sean, his CV is marked as what exhibit?
A48.
48, okay, 48 is fine. His technical memo of March 19, you have it as 49.
It's 58.
It's 58.
That's why I did the housekeeping. Okay, 58, for those who may have a copy out there. Okay. Let me go find what I was going to ask him. Michael, when were you retained for this project?
Jack,
I was
Overruled. You may answer the question, Mr. Sveen.
I was retained in 2023.
Can you be more precise?
you don't have to look things up.
I'm-
Just think now.
Yeah, I believe it was. I believe it was in December or November.
Mr. Sveen, just one moment. Mr. Gallagher, it is not appropriate for you to coach the witness during cross-examination.
And I would just ask the court reporter to note that this is a Zoom hearing and the witness is behind me, so this is not your typical in-person hearing. So,
That said, I will caution you not to coach the witness.
I'm not coaching the witness. It's behind. So,
Again, I will caution you not to coach the witness. Is that understood?
yes, I've stated what I wanted to state for the court reporter.
Thank you. Mr. Clark, you may proceed.
Michael, why were you retained?
I was retained to provide expert testimony and provide a wildlife analysis to address the concerns raised in the Hawk Mountain report.
Have you visited the site?
I have not been to the project. I've reviewed all the relevant exhibits. Quite familiar with solar projects across North America. I've reviewed, as I previously stated, a variety of reports from California, Alberta, Wisconsin, Florida, and I'm familiar with the biology of these species as well as mortality monitoring and sort of the relevant factors that goes into these projects and how and the results of mortality monitoring as we found at other projects across North America.
Did you review the site plans for this project?
I did.
Which ones?
Sorry, can you repeat that?
Which site plans have you reviewed? There are different dated site plans. What's the date of the site plan that you reviewed?
The last version that I reviewed of the conditional use plan was dated January 9th, 2024.
You prepared a draft document in December of 2023 to respond to the Hawk Mountain letter. Is that correct?
I believed I was drafting a version of the document at that time.
A version of what document?
A version of my wildlife analysis.
So if I look at Exhibit 58, dated March 19, 2024, is this the final version of a document you started drafting in December?
Yes.
The December draft, did you provide a copy to the client for review?
I did provide a copy to the client for review.
Did you receive any comments from the client on your draft?
What's your basis?
It's privileged information.
I think the question that he asked though was from the client. What's the privilege you're citing?
Back and forth in drafts of expert reports are privileged information or not subject to disclosure, so there's no reason why it should be subject to testimony.
What privilege are you citing?
It's the rule. I don't have the rule of evidence in front of me, but that's the basis for the objection. There's no court that would allow for any communication between an expert witness and the client and the attorney.
I think I agree with you with regard to the attorney. However, that was not the question. Mr. Clark, do you have a response?
I have no response. I think it's relevant, and I'm going to ask him what the comments were. I don't see any basis for a privilege.
I'm going to overrule the objection, but with this instruction to the witness, that to the extent that that you have any comments that were discussion or with counsel for your client, you do not, that evidence is excluded. So I will instruct you not to testify with regard to any discussions you may have had with counsel for your client. Mr. Clark?
Yeah, Michael, I want to be clear. You prepared a draft memorandum, I don't know the date, let's just say December,
Sure.
and you provided a copy to the client, correct?
Correct.
And the client commented on the draft?
He asked if there were comments, not what the comments were, so your objection is overruled.
I recall that the comments were fairly minimal.
Fairly minimal?
Yes.
Were they notations on the document, or were they transmitted by electronic mail?
So an objection.
Overruled.
I believe there were, this was a few months ago, but I believe that there were comments in the document, and there may have been comments in the email. But this was a few months ago.
Was the subject of important bird area included in your December draft?
Yes, important bird areas were a topic brought up by Hawk Mountain, so that's always been a component as part of my wildlife analysis.
And do you have any documentation to support your assertion that this project is not located in an important bird area?
Yes, you can go to the National Audubon Society website, and on there it clearly demarcates where the boundary is for the Kittatinny Ridge IBA. I believe I provide a link to it in my evidence as a reference. So you could simply follow that URL and it would take you to the location that shows you the boundary for the project, or boundary for that IBA.
Are you referring to the reference on page 8 of Exhibit 58, the last reference on the first page, on page 8, National Audubon Society 2013 Kittatinny Ridge, accessed October 15, 2023?
Correct.
And if I told you that this was designated as an important bird area by the National Audubon in 1999, would you agree or disagree with that statement?
I am unaware of the exact year that it was designated as an IBA.
Do you recognize the entire mountain was designated as an IBA?
I recognize that the boundary provided on this website was designated an IBA.
So you're relying solely on the Audubon Society's webpage. You didn't actually go look at the source documents?
I went to the webpage, which provides the site description. I downloaded the spatial files and reviewed that and compared it to the project area that was provided to me, and did that analysis and saw that those two areas did not overlap.
You were asked on direct examination about Dr. Goodrich's testimony, and that she cited an Alberta study. What Alberta study did she cite?
She did not provide a specific reference in her testimony. I believe, if I recall, she alluded to a study from Alberta that reviewed post-construction mortality in the province, but she did not explicitly state what the report was.
So what was it? Do you know?
As I previously stated, the only report that I am aware of is a report called Alberta Regional Solar Fatality Analysis that was authored by West in 2022.
Does that study appear on your CV?
The project that I was involved with, Foothills Solar, appear on my CV, and I discussed how I've been involved with updating that fatality analysis.
When were you hired by West?
I was hired by West in April 2023.
Looking at Exhibit 48, your CV under relevant experience, the first solar project you listed is the Elemental Energy Foothills Solar Power Plant, Alberta 2023-2024. Why did you list that project first?
The projects here have been put in order in terms of recent dates that I've worked on them. as well as, as relevance. So that one I predominantly noted first due to its relevancy at this hearing and my experience reviewing post-construction mortality monitoring projects.
It says here, West completed the Alberta Regional Solar Fatality Analysis 2022. Did you work on that?
No, I did not. That sentence talks about how that was a West report and goes on to say that since then more post-construction mortality monitoring studies have become available. Michael is working as a senior wildlife biologist on the project to review and summarize the findings from studies released after 2021 and to provide an updated report for the client.
Wasn't that project denied?
So the Foothills Solar Project did not receive regulatory approval, and I believe that it is going through revisions. So there were some differences in terms of the size of the project, as well as it being located within an important bird area, as designated by the National Audubon Society.
The application was denied, correct?
I gave you my answer, yes.
And therefore it's not under construction, correct?
The project is not under construction.
So how can there be post-construction monitoring studies for a project that wasn't approved?
Because those post-construction monitoring studies are not for that project, but are for operational studies within the province of Alberta, which have been constructed and are now operating and have biologists out there collecting data. That's why it says there's 11 solar post-construction monitoring studies publicly available in Alberta.
Is it 11 or 12?
It says 11 on the resume there.
And you prepared the resume?
Yes.
So I don't understand. Help me out here. A project that you didn't work on, that didn't get approved, you listed it number one on your experience for solar projects. Is that correct?
So when I joined when I became an employee at West, the project had already gone through its public hearing. And it was at the stage where there had been an initial review that was done to support the hearing. After all of that was completed, the client wanted to take a look at the new results that came in from 2022, so the new findings that had been found on other projects in the province, and they wanted to update the report. They wanted to have a better understanding of what was happening in the province. And so when I was brought on with West, I was involved with that aspect of the project to pull in these new reports and to see if there was anything new that we were going to find about the lake effect now that we had another year's worth of data on the project.
The confidential solar projects, Alberta 2020 ongoing. What can you tell us about that without violating confidentiality? Were any of them actually approved by Alberta?
So none of them have made it to that stage. So if once a project goes in to an application with the Alberta Utilities Commission in Alberta, the Alberta Utilities Commission is the regulator, then all of that information becomes publicly available.
Okay,
So those represent projects that have not made it to that stage, or maybe they started out at the very beginning stages of this was a potential project, and then it subsequently wasn't developed, or it did not make it to the stage where it would have gone public.
Isn't the whole point of your testimony tonight to demonstrate how post-construction solar projects will not have an adverse impact on wildlife?
My testimony tonight and the wildlife report that I've put together is to speak to the concerns raised by the Hawk Mountain letter.
Right, but the data you're relying on isn't based on post-construction solar projects.
What's the basis for the objection?
He's already, one, it's already been asked and answered, and two, it's already landed.
It's cross-examination. Mr. Cluck, I'm going to overrule the objection, but please tone down.
Tone down? Okay.
We know you get excited.
For the record, I'd like to object to the solicitor's characterization of my temperament. Exhibit 58, page 1. A Pennsylvania natural diversity inventory you reference. What does a Pennsylvania natural diversity inventory apply to? What is it that it looks to in its analysis?
So the Pennsylvania Natural Diversity Inventory it's basically a way for you to submit an application that goes under review by state and federal agencies. So you submit aspects of your project to it, and then you find out if you need to collect additional information on a project. Well, there's 3 agencies that it's submitted to: the Game Commission, the Pennsylvania Game Commission, Pennsylvania Department of Conservation and Natural Resources, the Pennsylvania Fish and Boat Commission, as well as U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. And from that, each of those departments determines whether or not there are known impacts for a project and whether or not they are requesting, need to request additional surveys or additional information before they can issue a clearance letter, which would state that there's no likely impact and no further coordination with another agency is needed.
Anything else?
I believe I've answered your question.
And the conclusion of the PNDI was, quote, no known impacts, correct?
Correct.
Does it say there was no known impacts to wildlife?
I believe the clearance letter, you can pull up the clearance letter to look at it, but it's to speak to wildlife. So for each of those departments that I spoke about, the Game Commission speaks to mammals and birds, the Department of Conservation and Natural Resources speaks to plants and invertebrates, the Fish and Boat Commission speaks to reptiles, amphibians, and aquatic species, and the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service is going to speak to federally endangered or threatened species. So all different aspects of wildlife and some aspects which wouldn't be considered wildlife.
Is this the first time you've ever reviewed a PNDI?
This is the first time that I've been involved with the PNDI, correct?
Okay, and if I told you it only applies to threatened and endangered species and or special concern species and resources, would you dispute that statement?
From what I understand, there are endangered and threatened species on the state level, and there are endangered and threatened species on the country level, and that is typically what a regulatory system is interested in. Those species of concern. So when we talk about protecting species, generally regulatory agencies want to protect listed and endangered species.
And it's your understanding exhibits 19 and 20 indicate no known impacts to wildlife?
I'm just pulling up those exhibits.
I'm sorry, the exhibit numbers refer to the two PNDIs that are in evidence in this matter.
The PNDIs are, from what I understand, they say no known impacts for the Pennsylvania departments, but the clearance letter that was issued is in reference to the U.S. Fish and Wildlife.
And that addresses bog turtles, correct?
That was the concern about U.S. Fish and Wildlife requesting bog turtle surveys.
And you say in your report that there was bog turtle surveys. You reference a phase 2, and in parentheses it says Davey, D-A-V-E-Y 2022, parentheses closed. Do you have a copy of that report?
I was provided here. Yes, I have a copy of that report.
Okay, we don't. I would request that it be provided, since you appear to rely on that document. You cite it as the #1 reference document. I'm not aware that it's been cited as an exhibit in this matter, and I think it's highly relevant, and we should get to review it.
Do you have a position, Mr. Gallagher?
I mean, I object. It's irrelevant to the conditional use standards. You can testify to whether or not the bog turtles is a regulatory issue. Environmental regulatory issue is not an issue of consideration. Irrelevant to this.
Do you dispute that your witness is testifying with regard to that document?
On cross-examination, he just testified to
Yeah.
I don't know what relevance it would be.
I think that the relevance to me is pretty clear. And I think that Mr.
We have two clearance.
I think that to the extent that that's being testified to, and when I look at 19 and 20, there is an indication under U.S. Fish and Wildlife Services of potential impact, and then there was a bog turtle study done that now you don't have available. Do you have a copy of that with you this evening?
No, but I would also note that going back to October, I think it was the very first hearing, or maybe it was the second hearing, Mr. Hughes testified as to the Findies, the impact to the bog turtle, and also testified that those surveys were conducted for Fish and Wildlife Services and provided, and there were also two exhibits in the record that those surveys satisfied the Indie concern from the pit.
Okay. Well, Mr. Cluck, I think that if you want this record, you're going to need to submit a draft subpoena for consideration by the board.
That's fine. I'm working on the list.
You may proceed with your cross-examination.
Michael, I'm still on page 1. I'm still in the same paragraph. A wetland delineation was completed for the project on April 11, 12, and October 12, 2022. citing Kimley Horn 2023. What is that document?
So that is the wetland delineation report that I provide in my references.
So in our case, there's an Exhibit 7, Wetland Delineation Report from Kimley Horn. Is that the same document as the one that you cite as Kimley Horn 2023?
It appears that they have different dates.
This is so, and therefore, is it not the same document?
The one that's marked as an exhibit has a revision dated November 21st, 2022. And I believe that there may be an updated version of that document from February 6, 2023.
Well, that isn't part of the record, so I'm going to add that to my list. You said February?
February 6th, 2023.
Thank you. I'll make the formal request to produce the document on the record.
The record is so noted.
Now, Michael, you didn't visit the site. Are you able to tell us what bird habitats are present in the area of the solar project?
The predominant habitat present in this solar project, where within the fenced areas is rotational crops in cultivation, from what I understand. Beyond that, outside, like I stated earlier, there are areas of treed and wetland habitat that the project has avoided.
So the predominant land use of the properties proposed for the solar panels is rotational crops?
Cultivation used for rotational crops.
And after the solar panels, assume they were approved and put in, what will be the use of that property? Will it still be able to be used for cultivating rotational crops?
From what I understand, there was native vegetation was proposed, but beyond that, I don't know what the operational use will be within those fenced areas.
How many acres on the proposed project are delineated wetlands?
So I don't believe that the project is proposed to encroach on any wetlands.
I didn't ask that. I said, how many acres within the project are delineated wetlands?
When you say within the project, you're referring to the project footprint, that there is no overlap between the project footprint and wetlands.
So it's your testimony there's no wetlands within the project footprint?
From the conditional use plans that I reviewed, there was no overlap between project components and wetlands.
Do you agree that projects with larger footprints may result in more avian fatalities than projects with smaller footprints?
That is a difficult question to answer because unfortunately, mortality that we see between projects is variable, and there seems to me more at play than simply size alone that's related to mortality. So it's not necessarily a one-to-one between a small project and a large project. There may be other factors at play that drives mortality at a project. But overall speaking, it's good to keep in mind the context of relative mortality of solar projects is relatively low compared to other industries or other anthropogenic influences such as bird mortalities from domestic cats or window collisions.
Your expertise is in reviewing post-construction mortality studies, is that correct?
That is one of my areas of expertise, yes.
How many post-construction mortality studies have you reviewed for solar projects east of the Mississippi?
So I spoke before about the projects that I have reviewed. So the ones that are publicly available are limited to California, Alberta, and Wisconsin and Florida. So those are right now, that's the state of post-construction mortality reports that we can actually review.
Have you visited the Hawk Mountain website to see their most recent counts of migratory bird patterns and this type of species for the past 30 days?
I did go to their website when I was formulating the first drafts of the report in 2023, and I did note at that time the numbers of that the corridor was high use for raptors at that time. I have not reviewed it in the past 30 days.
Would you agree that the migratory patterns for birds in this region here, Berks County, Katani Ridge, Hawk Mountain, is significantly different than Alberta, Canada, and California?
I would say that the way that birds migrate across these areas are different, but the question is whether or not the difference here is relevant. And if we were talking about a project proposed in a desert with no adjacent water bodies, I think that would be a different discussion than a number of birds moving through a project area in broadly speaking, similar circumstances to other forested areas or other areas with extensive cultivation. So the birds are, there are some maybe migratory patterns that are unique about this particular area in terms of how the raptors are migrating through. But of the factors that we've seen in post-construction mortality monitoring, those haven't been the ones raised as a particular concern.
Page 3 of Exhibit 58, your expert technical memorandum, you cite a 2016 study by Walston, W-A-L-S-T-O-N. Do you see that?
Yes.
Has there been an update to that study in the past 8 years?
To that specific study, I am not aware of if Walston specifically has updated his estimates on solar. I know that there's been other literature published on the estimates of solar projects and mortality associated with them. However, their methods about those estimations are perhaps not as robust as other estimators of mortality. So the one that I thought was the most applicable and relevant was Walston.
How many facilities with avian fatality data were studied in the Walston report?
Off the top of my head, I don't know the number. I think it's important to note that the report is from 2016. That's why I say as from 2016. And utility scale solar projects have been in development since then. So that could be an underestimate. But even if it is an underestimate of, say, a factor of 10, when you compare that to other sources of anthropogenic mortality, it is still extremely small, less than 1% of domestic cat mortalities alone.
Well, that's not what you cite, sir. You cite as of 2016, utility scale solar energy developments were only estimated to result in 37,800 to 138,600 bird mortalities annually, which represent 0.0001% of mortalities as compared to domestic cats alone. If I told you that the Walston report or study only relied on 3 studies, is that a representative sample?
I would say that that's the same statistical problem that we had with the original studies that came out on Kagan et al. 2014 on the lake effect. At that time, there wasn't that many large-scale solar projects available. So I think it's relevant to take that estimate with a grain of salt and recognize that perhaps there's a new study that could be done to better understand the mortality levels at these projects and how that's changed. And that's been part of the reason why I've been involved with post-construction mortality monitoring, to see if there are these large-scale sort of issues that have come up. So as an example, in the Kagan et al. 2014, there was sorry, let me correct myself. There was, in one of those earlier studies, they spoke about 9.9 fatalities per megawatt. But when we compare that to projects found in other areas of North America, we don't have a bird mortality rate that high that we've found. So we're starting with a small data set, and Walston et al. Is also using these first available projects, which some of them had quite high rates of mortality. So I think it's worthwhile examining, the reports from Alberta, the reports from Wisconsin and Florida and other areas of California to sort of look at this holistically to say, okay, is bird mortality a concern?
Is bird mortality a concern with this project?
So from a I don't see this project being a significant contributor to bird mortality.
Why do you
There could be bird mortalities that take place as has been shown on other projects, but we have no record of any large downing events on solar facilities right now. And when we look at the water associates and water obligates outside of California, we're just not seeing large numbers. When we do look at what species are common mortalities that we find on facilities, they're typically prey species like mourning dove and not endangered or threatened species.
So your concluding sentence that the bird mortalities represents 0.0001% of mortality as compared to domestic cats alone, I should take that with a grain of salt?
The difference will be when we sort of look at all of that together, even if we assume that you suggested that Walston et al. 2016 doesn't have enough reports, but even if we were to put more reports together, for that number to get anywhere near the amount of mortalities caused by domestic cats, which is 1.3 to 4.0 billion, would have to be an absolutely astounding increase in the estimate.
Will there be more bird mortalities once the panels are sited, or will there be more bird mortalities if the site is left the way it is today?
So there's a difficult problem that we're touching on here, and that's background mortality. So we know that prey species are hunted and they're killed, right? So there might be a hawk out there right now that kills a particular bird and eats it on the site. And so we know that there's some level of background mortality happening. We also know that with rotational crops, if farming practices are going through the breeding season and there are bird nests there, there's a potential that when those crops are harvested, there are mortalities associated with those birds. So when we look at building this new facility, if that agricultural practices are taken away and we've planted native vegetation and like that, there could be a scenario where the level of mortality is reduced because of nests not being destroyed. And the evidence right now in the scientific world, it's very hard to quantify what the level of background mortality is at a site. So it's not a black and white answer of will there be more or will there be less. But there is a potential that the project could increase bird mortality. But that will be very hard to separate from the background mortality that already exists there today.
You use the word significant in your expert opinion about the absence of a significant impact on wildlife. How do you quantify significant?
I think a better phrase that I could use is population level effects. That's what is discussed a lot in literature. It's whether or not there's enough mortality of a given species to affect the population. That's a topic right now where a number of papers are being written on and studied on what exactly is that number. So for common species that have shared genetics over a large area, the threshold cause a population level effect is going to be a lot higher than, say, an endangered species with only a few individuals available.
Will there be an effect on the migratory patterns of the birds that currently migrate between the Kittatinning Ridge and the Hawk Mountain Sanctuary?
No. There's no, it's hard to imagine how that would take place. Some of these birds are migrating huge distances, like the broadwing hawk that I talked about earlier, traveling from South America all the way up into the boreal forest in Canada. Absolutely massive, massive distances are being traveled. And this project is being proposed in an area that already has anthropogenic disturbance through roads, through power lines, through buildings, that those birds are already facing. So if this project is built, it's already within an anthropogenically disturbed area. So I would not expect that it would have an effect on the migratory or migrating species through the area, or their patterns of migration.
But to be clear, you've never observed the migratory patterns in this region in Windsor Township, have you?
I have not conducted migratory bird surveys within that county, but I have in other areas, watching those raptors migrate through across a variety of habitats, through cultivation and forested areas, and I have not personally observed it in that area.
So to be clear, your expert technical memorandum does not address the effect of the solar project on the migratory pattern of the birds in this region? I guess that's a simple yes or no question.
My report was written to address the concerns of Hawk Mountain, and I don't believe they worded a concern in that particular way.
I'm sorry, I thought this was a report on wildlife analysis. Wait, did you just limit it to Hawk Mountain's letter?
At the bottom of the first page of my wildlife analysis, it says that West was retained to respond to the letter from the Hawk Mountain Sanctuary Association and to address their concerns raised in that letter specifically.
I'm sorry, I thought this March document is...
What's the basis? He's getting the same thing. He keeps asking the same questions, getting repetitive and argumentative. Deal with it.
I'm going to overrule the objection, but to the extent that you're covering the same ground, which I think
No,
you
I'm
may,
not. If I could finish my question up.
please finish your question.
The December draft that has not been produced, that document did not address Dr. Lori Goodrich's testimony, did it?
You'll have to remind me of the date of Lori Goodrich's testimony.
No, you can answer my question. You drafted a document in December. Did it address Dr. Goodrich's testimony?
I don't believe I addressed their testimony. I spoke only to the letter, which was this document.
Right, and I understand earlier when we had the lawyer discussion, this March document is different from the December draft primarily because you addressed Dr. Goodrich's testimony, correct?
I wouldn't say that. I think there were other components of Dr. Goodrich's testimony that I could have spoken to or highlighted, but I didn't include in this document.
Where in the March document, Exhibit 58, do you address Dr. Goodrich's testimony?
I don't believe that I addressed Dr. Goodrich's testimony in my document.
Finally, page 4 of Exhibit 58, and then I'll be done. In the middle it says, West also conducted an analysis of publicly available post-construction mortality studies of solar photovoltaic fatalities in Alberta, Canada, and found no water obligate fatalities across, and it says 12 studies. It then cites West 2022. Is this the same study that you cited in your CV under relevant experience under Elemental Energy Foothills Solar Power Plant Project?
I believe it is.
So why the difference between 11 and 12?
It may be a typo.
You have an office in Camp Hill, or at least your company does?
Correct.
Have you been there?
I have not.
So the letterhead on page 1 of Exhibit 58, 150 Corporate Center Drive, Suite 106, is not the location of where this memorandum is prepared?
The location where this memorandum was prepared was the closest west office to the project site.
This memo was prepared in Camp Hill?
No, this memo was not prepared in Camp Hill. This memo was addressed with the letterhead with the west office with the closest proximity to the project location.
Where was it prepared?
I prepared this in my office here.
In Alberta?
I work out of the Calgary, Alberta office, but I am located in Saskatoon, Saskatchewan.
Okay.
So I would have prepared this memo while working here in Saskatoon.
All right, I would suggest when you put Camp Hill that you use the correct acronym for Pennsylvania. Instead of PN, it's PA. That's all I have.
What was the objection to?
The phrase, I mean, it's just getting argumentative.
Well,
No, it's misrepresenting the location of the company in the
This is
document.
argumentative.
so, well, the board will give it the appropriate weight. I mean, he's concluded his examination. Mrs. Palanek, do you have any cross-examination for this witness? Do you want to come forward just so you can use the microphone?
So you review data as opposed to actually collecting data, correct?
Sorry, can you repeat that? It's hard to hear through that microphone.
You review data as opposed to actually collecting it?
Correct.
So is it fair to say that there just is not enough data yet?
There is not, with respect to what?
Dead birds, migratory patterns, anything that can affect them. It sounds as though you kept saying there was not really enough data to support anybody's opinion.
I'm sorry, you're going to have to narrow the bounds of your question a bit. When you say that there's not enough data, what are you referring to?
You're talking about the data of whether birds are going to die because of having a solar farm as opposed to farming, or?
So, so I think there's enough data to when we look at a project like this, to compare it to other studies that have been done, which show that there's relatively low rates of mortality compared to other anthropogenic sources, and that in an area like this, that the lake effect is unlikely to apply to this particular project.
So basically, the lake effect hypothesis is what the data is limited to?
I would argue that there is not very much data to support the lake effect hypothesis, and as more data is collected, the more that it's really refuted for the broad scale. Like I said earlier, if the lake effect hypothesis does hold, it would be limited to the Sonoran and Mojave Desert region in Southern California.
Is it fair to say that you're employed by the solar and wind farm industry?
I am employed by Western Ecosystems Technologies, and a big part of this company is providing scientific evidence. And I'm interested in understanding the phenomena and reviewing the different publicly available sources and journal articles to provide robust evidence and to get an understanding of what projects are, regardless of what industry they are being conducted under. But predominantly, the projects that I work on are solar and wind projects.
What do you know about snow geese migration and tundra swan migration in Berks County, Pennsylvania?
So snow geese are an interesting species. So snow geese are one of the most abundant waterfowl species in the world. I believe their population is estimated at approximately 14 million individuals. And so in the project area, it's on the edge of their wintering range along the eastern coast. And in their wintering ranges and during migration, they like to forage in areas of cultivation where there is leftover crop from the year prior that they can forage on. Interestingly, snow geese have actually been increasing year to year in terms of their populations, because historically they would breed up in the Arctic and be able to gain a lot of weight, and then when they came down to the winter, that was sort of their limiting factor. But with the rise of agriculture, they've been able to eat a lot more and survive winters, survive a lot more winters, to the point where the population has been increasing so much that it's actually causing problems in the Arctic because of foraging. With respect to snow geese at this project, I understand that they've been foraging within the cultivated fields during the winter, as well as during migration.
No further questions, thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Hartman, no questions. Mr. and Mrs. Yob, no questions. Mr. Balthaser, Mrs. Balthaser.
Okay, so it states on the company's website that West provides range from wildlife studies, including bird and bat studies for wind and solar energy and technology. So that's what the company does. So is it fair to assume that the Camp Hill office also does the same work?
Yes.
Okay, and I'm just curious as to then why would a witness or an expert witness not come from the Camp Hill office?
So the reason that I was brought on is because of my experience on post-construction monitoring projects. There are I've been involved now on the Alberta side through a lot of pre-construction and post-construction solar projects. Been involved with at least 40 at this point. So I have a wide repertoire, and my specialization in the Foothills report and the Alberta fatality solar analysis, as well as working on updating that report with new data from across North America, puts me in a unique position where I have reviewed a lot of post-construction monitoring data that not a lot of other biologists can say that they've done or been involved with.
But yet, so you're saying that there's no one that would have been qualified at Camp Hill that would have been closer to this area that could have actually come here to the area and been more boots on the ground?
So we do have biologists located in Camp Hill, and they are working on solar projects as well. They don't have the same level of experience on post-construction solar projects that I do. And in discussion with the clients, it sounded like they were interested in my credentials and experience to speaking to these topics.
You mentioned earlier about fencing around, the solar farm. And you mentioned that large animals, there's areas between fencing that large animals could actually pass through, and that smaller animals could actually get, underneath the fence. Okay, so
Yes.
I guess I didn't realize animals were that smart that they would know, large animals would know to go around the fencing, where smaller animals would go through the fencing. I mean, we were just looking at a fox this morning, just hopping through the field. Is that little fox going to know that, I have to go around? Or even that small hole that you're saying on the bottom of the fencing that's there to let the animals go out, would they not also let the animals go in and kind of trap them in that area?
So with regards to your last question there, the fencing would allow small animals to pass in and out. There's been some studies done on things like coyotes that are quite good at figuring out how to make it through exclusion fencing such as this one and many other study designs, where they may not succeed 100% of the time, but despite our best efforts to keep them out with various different types of fencing technology, they can still find their ways in. For some species, a chain link fence isn't going to provide much of a barrier. For something like a snake that can fit through the holes of the chain link, and in those areas that have that gap underneath to pass through, those species are going to that are going to sort of find those opportunities or have the potential to use them.
And how high would you say that pass-through is typically?
How high is that, the passage?
Yeah, the pass-through that you're saying that small animals could actually, go under.
I believe I say, so in my evidence, from my understanding, the fence is raised to 1 foot in sections
1
to
foot.
facilitate wildlife movement.
Okay, so that's actually high enough that a small child could actually go in there as well, or somebody's dog.
It's 1 foot, so what would be reasonably able to pass through the fence?
Okay. Okay, I have no further questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Fowler?
Who is your client?
My client is Mountain Trail Solar LLC.
Have you received a payment or retainer for doing a report and testifying?
Sorry, could you repeat the question?
Have you received a payment or retainer for doing a report and for testifying?
Overruled. You may answer the question, Mr. Sveen.
Can you just elaborate what you mean retainer? I don't receive anything beyond my salary from West when working on this project.
So the payer's name is West?
My company is named West.
Okay. Have you ever visited a finished solar project?
Yes.
Have you ever counted bird mortalities at a finished solar project?
Have I ever, sorry, say that again, sorry?
Have you ever counted bird mortalities at a finished solar project?
No, I've not done the post-construction mortality monitoring on foot, but I've done that for transmission lines, and I've also been involved with the wind side as well for wind turbines.
My last question is, have you seen a domestic cat kill a hawk?
Is the question, have I personally seen a cat kill a hawk?
A domestic cat, yes.
I have not personally seen a domestic cat kill a hawk.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Fowler?
No question.
Questions from the board?
Yeah. All right, good evening. When Miss Goodrich was here, I'm not sure what month it was, but I basically asked her 3 questions, and I really never got an answer for any one of them. And it was concerns of migratory birds and surrounding properties of projects. We are considered by the Berks County Planning Commission, we are in the Hawk Mountain region of Berks County. And within that area, it's basically 15 communities. Their breakdown of the areas is agricultural preservation, ag preservation, developed, environmental hazard, designated growth, future growth, permanent open space and recreation, and rural conservation. We are pretty much in the center of the Hawk Mountain region. So within these 15 communities, they list the acreage of all these areas. Now, I only took the acreage of the ag preservation, permanent open space and recreation, and rural conservative, which is basically open space in our township. The proposed site for these solar panels exists of 440 acres of panels, correct? Do you agree with that?
Yes.
Okay. Adding up all the acreage from all 15 of these communities in those 3 categories, the total area of available space for birds to migrate through and to is 132,103 acres. So if you take 440 acres out of that, you have available, that is actually 0.0033%, 33 thousandths of a percent. This information is available in the Berks County Comprehensive Plan, page 234 and 233. So if we put 400 houses in these, 440 houses in this area, besides solar panels, are these birds going to adapt to the adjacent 132,000 acres? In your opinion?
So, just so that I'm clear on your question,
We have-
question.
Excuse
if
me,
you
we
put
have,
the
we have
panels
adjacent open
on-
land.
Sorry, can you just restate your question a
Yes,
bit
I
more
will.
concisely so I
Yeah,
understand it?
we have adjacent open land around this 440 acres. And in your professional opinion, are these birds going to migrate to adjacent fields to where these panels are?
Sorry, the audio's cutting out. I'm just going to have to ask you to repeat the question.
Okay. There's 132,000 adjacent acres of open space around this project.
Yes.
Will the birds adapt and go to the other fields? There is actually a farm field on the west side of Monument Road, which is probably just as big as the solar field. Are the birds going to migrate through the solar panels, or are they going to adjust and migrate through the open areas?
Right. So I think with respect to how bird use is going to change at the project, if there are birds currently using the areas of cultivation right now, they may be displaced to adjacent areas. So in the case of something like snow geese, if there's another field in close proximity that has the crop type that they are interested in eating, they may be displaced and move over to an adjacent piece of land to use that to eat that crop, or some of them might still remain in the project area. It's gonna depend on the species. So for migrating rabbits that are just flying over the project and not interacting with it, for those individuals that don't interact with it and just fly straight over other migratory birds, it's unlikely that those patterns are going to change. We have these areas where there's trees, there's wetlands that aren't going to change as well. So there is some level of adaptability in these species when we look at where they can go and where they're going to be displaced to. Another way to think about it as well is there's a lot of existing anthropogenic disturbance in the project area and beyond. So where there's roads, transmission lines, housing, industrial complexes, all of those are already sort of factors that these birds are already contending with in the area as well.
So you're saying that this 440 acres will have a minimal impact on the bird migration in this area with the available surrounding areas in this community, or in the Hawk Mountain region?
It's going to be a low impact on birds migrating in this region, given the level of existing anthropogenic disturbance and the fact that this project's going to be sited on cultivation.
All right, thank you. That's all.
Mr. Davis, do you have questions?
Yes, I do. Michael, on the technical memorandum that Mr. Gallagher passed out beginning this evening, at the top, the letterhead that you have on there says West Environmental Statistical Consultants. Did you use that letterhead from stock material, or did you prepare that yourself?
The letterhead on this project for this technical memo is a standard reporting template.
Okay, how long has that office been in Camp Hill?
Off the top of my head, I don't know how long the Camp Hill office has been open for.
Would you guess it was a few months or multiple years?
I can't speculate. I started at the company in April 2023, and when I became involved with this project, I spoke with some West employees from Pennsylvania, and I am unaware of the date that office was open.
So what's the purpose of citing the office in Pennsylvania if you're in Alberta, Canada?
Sorry, can you repeat the question? I didn't catch the-
Why did you choose that letterhead versus your letterhead from Alberta, Canada?
I selected the letterhead because that was the closest office in proximity to the project.
I Googled that address multiple times here, and I cannot find that location in Pennsylvania in Camp Hill. The closest thing I can come up with is a UPMC Women's Behavioral Health Specialist.
You could go to West's website, and on there they have the locations of their offices. It may be the case that it's not on Google Maps, but West's website would have that information.
It creates a lot of doubt because I can't find it. That's all I have.
Mr. Long? No questions. Is there any redirect?
Mr. Sveen, you, as far as you're aware, you have reviewed all publicly available post-construction mortality reports that exist.
That is correct.
You believe that you were asked about not being or not having studied any projects in Pennsylvania. Does that impact your testimony, do you believe?
So the project, this has been the first project that I've been involved with in Pennsylvania.
Specifically, there was a question about the birds that are present in Pennsylvania. Was it necessary for you to have visited the site to render an opinion?
No, like I alluded to earlier, the biology related to mortalities and solar panels and bird behavior has been observed across North America, and visiting the site wouldn't change my opinion, given that I've reviewed the available information, the land cover habitat types that are available, and the designs and application for the project. So I don't think that visiting the site would provide value or change the conclusions that I came to in my wildlife analysis.
Okay. There was a question about the phraseology of significant impact in your report. Just generally speaking, any development would have an impact. There's an impact associated with any development if you're changing anything, regardless.
Yeah, so typically when we're doing an environmental assessment, we sort of assess the level of impact, and we're very cautious to, not say no impact, but low impact or low risk is the way that you would characterize a project like this.
Okay. And all of your conclusions, you referenced all the studies that you reviewed in your report, correct?
Correct.
Okay. And all of the conclusions that you've reached are based on, you derived them from your knowledge of these studies and reached these conclusions on your own?
Correct.
Okay. I have no further questions.
Thank you. Recross, Mr. Cluck?
No recross.
Thank you. Mrs. Palinuk, do you have any recross? Mr. Hartman? No? Mr. Yob? No? Mr. Balthaser? Mrs. Balthaser, no? Ms. Fowler? Mr. Fowler? Any additional questions from the board? None. Okay. At this point, Mr. Sveen, we thank you for your testimony.
I would just ask to move Exhibits 48 and 58 into the record.
Is there any objection?
No objection.
Any objection, Mrs. Palinuk? Mr. Hartman? Mr. Yob? Mr. Balthaser? Mrs. Balthaser? Ms. Fowler? Mr. Fowler? The exhibits are admitted and will be made part of the record. At this point, we will take a 10-minute recess.